Hello, and welcome to the Cloud Security Alliance's webinar series, CSA Cloud Bytes, where we explore the latest advancements and challenges in cloud computing. Today's webinar, sponsored by Security, is titled Foundations of a Next-Gen Data Security Program, and we are joined by Nikhil Girdhar, Senior Director of Data Security, and then John Janikowski, Chief Information Security Officer, AAR Corp. Just a few quick announcements before we begin. Please be aware that slides from this webinar will not be provided. However, a recording of today's session will be available shortly after its conclusion. Before you leave the webinar, please take a moment to fill out a brief survey located at the bottom of your screen. Your feedback is valuable to us and will help us improve future webinars. Now I will pass it off to our presenters to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this webinar on Foundations of a Next-Gen Data Security Program. Today, we'll talk about the various building blocks that can help you better protect your data in different environments. And I'm really happy that we have an amazing speaker and a panelist joining me today, John. Just as a quick background, John is the VP and CISO leading both security, privacy, and compliance at AAR Corp. John, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started. And John, maybe can you tell us a little bit about AAR Corp and your role there at the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here to talk about these topics. I think it's important to not only myself in the industries that we serve, but I think there are corollaries that apply to many others as well. So AAR Corporation is a aviation services, primarily maintenance, repair, and overhaul to the commercial aviation and government sectors. Founded in 1951, we employ about 5,000 employees globally, and are always looking for new and innovative ways to expand our business. Sometimes that's through organic projects and identifying new innovative revenue streams, and other times that could be inorganic as well. And so we're hyper focused and vigilant for those opportunities, and we do both of those organic and inorganic growth opportunities pretty much all the time, with a large focus on our digital transformation efforts, and then being able to do more with existing assets. And here today we're going to talk about data protection as it applies to security, compliance, and privacy, which is absolutely central to that.
Thanks, Sean. Absolutely. And I'm really glad that we're partnering for this, given the relevance of data protection for the kind of the clientele that you are serving. And so looking forward to the conversation. And supporting John, I am Nikhil Girdhar, Senior Director of Data Security Products at Security. Our mission at Security is to really help you all safely use your data. And that's why it's such an important topic that we are bringing for all of you. The way we're going to plan this conversation next 40 minutes or so is I'm going to quickly set up context for a minute, and then we'll have a meaningful dialogue with John. So as a background, I do want to acknowledge that protecting data in today's landscape is not easy, right? As a practitioner, you all are facing both external challenges and internal forces, right? One, you're dealing with exponential data growth. I was looking at some stats and it's mind-blowing. Many organizations are going to add as much data in the next 2 years as they've added in the last 1 decade, right? So that is something that's very, very complex. And now that data is also dispersed in multiple clouds, number of assets that you have managed. So it's highly distributed. And this landscape continues to get more complex for good reasons, right? Think about innovative use cases like Gen AI. Data is a key component to that. So that kind of compels organizations to collect more data because it becomes a strategic advantage. And all of this data is now kind of incumbent and facing many different threats as well as compliance regulations. And if these forces are not kind of intimidating enough, then we have internal challenges around visibility into data, not knowing what data exists where, visibility into sensitive information. And all of these systems containing sensitive data are kind of affected by vulnerabilities, which are often exploited in breaches, issues around managing access to this data, and then also balancing not just controlling the security aspect of data, but also making sure that your business teams have access to data, because ultimately that's the reason why your organization wants to collect data so that you can mine the value out of it. But that balance is never easy. But one common mistake I've seen security teams make here is like you hear a problem and you dive straight into the technology and the solution on that problem. That never works, right? And I see John nodding your head. So, John, um, I think you kind of echo here that, okay, you have to start with the planning and the overall strategy first. So maybe share from the perspective of a CISO, what does that security strategy planning look like in a company?
Sure. Well, the first thing that it's important to do from my perspective is this is particularly apparent when we're looking to do innovative projects, not necessarily mergers and acquisitions. So it's kind of that organic growth scenario that I outlined previously. And the important thing is to keep an open mind, because generally speaking, if it's not an IT related project, if it comes from the business, it's because they think it's important and they think it's it's going to help us achieve new revenue or cut costs or whatever the objective is. So from a CISO perspective, it's important to keep an open mind. I like to say that I never lead from no. It's how do we get to yes? And ultimately, when data is a product or an input into to something that due care must be taken in order to get to that end state. All too often, organizations will lead with a tool to help them do something better or to make them more efficient or help identify new ways of doing things. But they often overlook the inputs into that. So in other words, it's important to understand the objective before deciding on the tool that will help you meet that objective. And sometimes it's a little bit like the tail wagging the dog when a business partner comes to us with an idea to implement a new tool. We need to put the brakes on that a little bit and get an understanding of what the objectives and the requirements are.
I love the fact that, John, you mentioned data is a product, right? Like going in with the mindset of enabling the business team and not just thinking as a gatekeeper of the data. So as you kind of start with the business perspective of data, um, at some point you're also probably defining different data policies within the organization. So how does that process look like within the company?
So it's all data policies. I like to think of policies in the terms of think about policies and then you think about guidelines, you think about standards. They all have different meanings. But when we're talking about policy, we're really talking about corporate legislation, right? And I see that my role is not necessarily always to draft that legislation, but it's a little bit of the legislative process, but it's also part of the judicial process as well. So how do we enforce good data hygiene practices, and then not only that, but make sure that our policies aren't stagnant either, and that they're refreshed and they change with the times as they need to. But ultimately, it comes down to risk and how we measure and evaluate risk in everything that we do. Whether it's in a hangar from a safety perspective, or whether we're planning, a new product line that's going to be, a generator of new revenue. So, what are the risk profiles, and how do we understand that, and how do we treat that? Because there are certain outcomes to every single risk decision, right? When I think about this, I think about the 6 potential outcomes. We could either accept the risk as is and say, all right, well, we're going in with eyes open. We could mitigate it and say, okay, well, this is an unacceptable risk. We need to mitigate this fully. of which there could be some significant cost to risk mitigation, as you all know, or we could possibly mitigate it to an acceptable level, which is kind of the hybrid approach. And then we have the other options as well, where we can transfer to a third party. Maybe there's a solution provider that is willing to absorb some of that risk. We're not absolved of it by any means, but we put the onus of establishing and maintaining the controls on a third party. We could avoid it by doing something different. But the one thing we should never ever do is ignore it. And part of this gets teased out of those conversations with the business once we understand what the objectives and the requirements are, and ultimately what the goal of the planned outcome is.
That's a very rich, rich triaging framework, and I'll the takeaway for me is like you're establishing a very well documented process of kind of taking data and the project in the mind and establishing what is your risk tolerance and how do you kind of address that. So that's super helpful. And as we have done that planning process, I think that leads to, okay, with that guidance in place, it makes it easier for the teams within the security department to start thinking about, okay, how do you implement those controls? And this is where really the tooling comes in and you sort of start operationalizing different assessments and then mitigations. So the way for our audience, the way we are going to frame the next part of conversation is with this background strategy in place, now we're going to start thinking about various kind of controls that you need to be thinking about. But even before those controls, there is some foundational visibility that's needed, right? And so let's start shifting gears and think about the technology landscape today. And another common pain point I've hear routinely from our customers and security teams is that the complexity of tooling. There's so many data tools that are not integrated. And in a way, oftentimes people say that, okay, that's holding them back. John, do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
I do, absolutely. The one thing that's not on this slide is the interaction and the integrations between those silos. So it's easy to identify the silos. What's more difficult is to tear down those silos and do it in a controlled way that doesn't put you at undue risk for exposing sensitive data to those that are outside the need to know.
100%, right? And breaking those silos requires the people interaction, the process interaction, technology integration. And without those, like it leads to so much inefficiencies. I've heard people kind of talk about blind spots, like teams having to operate without data context, which leads to inefficient decision making that kind of close down, let's say, access to a project. They're not able to move quickly. They don't have access to data. It affects revenue. And then there's the other aspect of risk. So in general, what we're seeing almost an evolution of mindset, both on the people process side as well as the technology side. And one analogy I want to share for our listeners is like think about network security and operations, right? We've had a concept of network operations center, bringing all aspects of network together and you're monitoring those. Similarly, on the security side, you have security operations center, right? You have rigorous monitoring of what's happening, complete command over your security. But there's nothing like that for data. So in a way, you almost need to start thinking about a data command center where different teams, security, privacy, governance, compliance can come in to kind of frame that strategy around decisions, but also have access to technology so that you have shared context around data and ability to kind of make decision and operationalize controls. So what we're going to, John and I are going to share with you now is this idea around data component, a data command center, but also various building blocks that go along with that. So let's dive in kind of with the first core topic, which is visibility around that data, right? Very, very important. And that visibility starts with discovery of the assets. But I can imagine that's not an easy thing to accomplish. So John, would love to hear your perspective on like, why is asset discovery such a difficult task for an enterprise?
Absolutely. It's because data exists everywhere, and it's really difficult to get your arms around just the massive sprawl that companies are facing. whether it's structured data in various applications and databases, and in the cloud or on-prem, doesn't really matter. It's a challenge to identify all of those sources. But when you add unstructured data into that equation too, that's the X factor that takes it up another order of magnitude in terms of complexity, because now you have documents and things that could be easily mislaid. They're easy to share with others, and what happens to that information once it leaves your premises is anybody's guess. So I think of data in organizations as kind of a data sieve, and how do you stop that, or at least control that? And there are a lot of technologies and tools and processes and procedures that will help you do that. But identifying that data, cataloging it, and inventorying it is the first step, and then taking a systematic, pragmatic approach to putting some controls in place that will reduce the sieve-like quality or quantity of data being outside of your control.
That's a very interesting analogy, and I had not thought about it. Almost you need like real-time oversight over your data, which is kind of the sim-like factor, but not easy. You mentioned like variety of data. So coming fresh from the heels of reInvent, like AWS itself has so many data services, and that doesn't even take into account all the shadow data assets. Like many teams are migrating like the legacy databases like MongoDBs and SQL servers that don't show up in your AWS console. How do you keep track of that data? So that's another huge pain point. John, is dark data a challenge that you see as well?
It is, absolutely. So if you think about let's take an example. Let's say analytics, kind of a business intelligence and analytics type of a tool. When you're aggregating data from various different data sets, you're doing so with a set of privileges and entitlements that apply to you as an individual. Now, what happens when all of that data gets aggregated into a data set that is now published to others, and maybe they don't have the same entitlements that you do? Now, did you cause a situation where you're actually spilling potentially confidential or sensitive data to those outside that need to know, because now it's in some aggregated form or fashion that's being used for data analytics, let's say? So while you can individually control the access to these inputs, but when you aggregate these data sets together, then it takes the problem to a whole new dimension altogether.
Totally. And aggregation reminded me like I almost think that data is very different from the workloads, right? Workloads, they may spin up and spin down, but they live in one place for a majority of time. But data kind of flows, right? Think about all the transformations and connections between your on-prem databases to cloud and your SaaS applications, people kind of pulling reports. And that also brings the other challenge from my perspective, John, which is how do you kind of see these connections? And without that connection, you don't necessarily understand the full picture. What do you think about like how do you is that something critical for companies?
Absolutely, and it's getting more and more complex as the days go by. Now that there's so many open APIs that allow that integration between these previously siloed data elements, and then you have the direct integration, the historically direct integration that we've always used in the past. But now that data proliferation is so widespread across the organization, it still comes down to essentially establishing a good hygiene practice, and it's not a one and done type of an effort. Is that this is constantly ongoing. If you become stagnant in this, then that the rate of change, not only the rate of change of data, but the creation of new data that what you thought was true only minutes ago is no longer true. So it's very important that if you establish the kind of the data command center, if you will, that that is